It was our spot, tucked in the corner of that cozy little cafe, where the smell of cinnamon clung to the air and the waitress knew our names. Claire and I had met there every week for years. No matter what was going on, we always made time. So I ordered her usual too, just in case she showed up late. Then my phone buzzed. Caught up with work? Rain check? That was it. No smiley face. No, I'll make it up to you. Just cold. Distant. Something felt off, but I shrugged it away. She was probably just stressed. We all get busy, right? Later that day, I grabbed Ethan's tablet to finally buy that vintage cookbook I'd been eyeing for weeks. He'd left it on the couch, open. I wasn't snooping. I had no reason to. But as I was typing in the search bar, a message popped up. Claire's name. I didn't mean to click it. It just happened. And what I saw made my stomach turn. Flirty messages, emoji-filled innuendos, and then the photo. Her. Like that. Sent to him. My hands went numb. I wanted to unsee it, to rewind time, to tell myself it was some kind of twisted prank. But I couldn't. I sat there, the tablet still glowing in my lap, as everything I knew started to crumble. My best friend. My boyfriend. The two people I trusted most. And they were doing this behind my back. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just cried. The quiet kind of crying, the kind that makes you feel like you're disappearing. But when the sun rose the next morning, something in me had shifted. I looked at my reflection, puffy eyes and all, and I knew what I had to do. They had broken something in me, but they had no idea what I was about to rebuild in return. You know what's strange? The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the silence that came after. The way I sat at the edge of my bed, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like him, wondering how long it had been going on. Was it one night? A month? Did they laugh about me when I wasn't around? Every memory twisted into something ugly. Our late-night talks, the sleepovers with Claire, the times I'd gush about Ethan while she smiled and nodded. God, she must have been smiling for all the wrong reasons. I thought about texting her. I thought about texting him, just to say, I know. But something held me back. Pride, maybe, or clarity. The kind that comes when you're finally too hurt to keep begging for answers. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. They didn't make a mistake, they made a choice. And now, it was my turn. I wasn't going to be the sad, broken woman in their story. I was going to rewrite it, my way. I got out of bed, washed my face, and made a cup of coffee with hands that barely stopped shaking. The smell grounded me, bitter, familiar, and as I sipped it, an idea began to form. Sharp, quiet, and cold. Not the kind of revenge that screams, the kind that smiles. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Let them stay comfortable in their little secret. Let them believe I was still in the dark. Because something was shifting in me. Something dangerous. Something powerful. And I knew just where I'd start. I started watching them, not in a creepy, obsessive way, more like observing, listening. Ethan would come home, kiss me on the forehead like nothing had changed, toss his keys on the table, ask about dinner. Claire still texted sometimes, asking if I wanted to catch up, like nothing had happened. It made my skin crawl. But I smiled, played along. I answered just enough to keep up the illusion. They had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead of them. The thing is, I didn't want to just hurt them. I wanted them to feel it. The way I had. I wanted the lie to explode right in front of them. Not in anger, but in elegance. No shouting, no ugly scenes. Just the kind of blow that lands with a smile. And for that, I needed patience, timing, and someone who could help me stir the pot. Someone close enough to make it personal. That's when I remembered Julian, Ethan's younger brother, the golden child. quiet, kind, charming in that effortless way that made people lean in when he spoke. We'd always gotten along, but I never gave it much thought. Until now. I hadn't seen him in ages. But maybe that was about to change. I picked up my phone, opened my calendar, and smiled to myself. There was a gallery opening this weekend, the kind of place Julian used to love. Maybe I just happened to be there too. The gallery buzzed with soft music and polite laughter, the kind of elegant noise that never quite fills the space. I walked slowly, letting my heels click against the floor, every step deliberate. My heart wasn't in the art, not really. I was scanning faces, feigning interest in abstract brushstrokes and overpriced sculptures. And then, there he was, Julian. Standing near a painting like he belonged in the frame, hands in his pockets, head tilted, quietly lost in thought. He hadn't changed much, still had that warm, effortless charm that made you forget to breathe for a second. He noticed me before I could pretend to notice him. "Lena?" he said, like a surprise wrapped in nostalgia. I turned, let the smile bloom slowly, the kind that says this is unexpected, even when it's anything but. We hugged briefly, his scent oddly comforting, like cedarwood and memories. He looked good, better than I remembered, and in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't acting, not completely. There was a part of me, a very real part, that was glad to see him. We walked through the gallery together, shoulder to shoulder, talking about art, life, and everything we hadn't said in years. I laughed too easily, he smiled too much, and there was a flicker in his eyes, something tender, maybe even hopeful. I let my hand brush his once, as if by accident. He didn't pull away. If anything, he lingered. And I thought, this might be easier than I expected. But under the charm, under the warmth, I stayed sharp. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a step, one he didn't even know he was taking. Julian started texting me the next day. Just little things at first. A photo of a painting that reminded him of our night. A quote from a book he said I'd love. And I answered, of course. I kept it light, playful. But something about the way he wrote, the way he saw me, was different. There were no games, no hidden tones. He made me feel seen, really seen, in a way Ethan never bothered to. And for a moment, I forgot I was supposed to be playing a part. We met for coffee the following week, then lunch, then late-night walks. Each time felt easier, more natural. I started dressing for him, soft fabrics, warm tones, a touch of perfume I knew lingered in hugs. He always noticed. He always looked at me like I was something rare. And maybe I started looking at him the same way. There were moments when I'd catch myself laughing, really laughing, and wonder if I was slipping. If this revenge story was turning into something else entirely. But I didn't forget. Not for a second. Every smile, every lingering glance, I still knew why I was doing this. It was part of the plan. And yet, the plan had never included this ache I felt when I said goodbye to Julian each night. Or the flutter in my chest when he texted, "Made me think of you." I'd set this in motion with ice in my veins. But somehow, warmth had found its way in. And that terrified me more than anything. One night, we ended up at his place. Nothing planned, nothing forced. Just 2 glasses of wine, a shared playlist, and the soft comfort of the couch between us. He told me stories from his childhood, the ones Ethan never shared. How their father was hard on them. How Julian always felt like he was living in his brother's shadow. Maybe that's why I never said anything before, he admitted, looking at me like he was letting go of a weight. I thought you were always meant for him. My heart twisted. I wanted to tell him how wrong he was. Instead, I leaned in, not because I was acting, not because it was part of some scheme, but because I wanted to. And when our lips met, It wasn't calculated. It was soft, tentative, like we were both testing the edges of something fragile. It didn't feel like revenge in that moment. It felt like surrender. And when I laid my head on his chest afterward, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, I knew I was in trouble. Deep trouble. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Julian was everything Ethan wasn't. Thoughtful, honest, present. He looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. And for once, I let myself believe it. Still, late at night, when I was alone again, I'd stare at my reflection and whisper, "Don't forget." Because no matter how sweet Julian tasted, the bitterness of betrayal still lingered. And soon, everything would come to light, on a night they'd never forget. Julian had this way of making everything feel easy, effortless. The kind of man who opens the car door without making it a show, who remembers your favorite wine, who actually listens. We fell into rhythm quickly. Weekend trips, late-night takeout, quiet mornings tangled in sheets and sunlight. I knew I was supposed to be cautious, to keep my walls up. But they crumbled, piece by piece, every time he looked at me like I was worth the wait. And maybe I started believing him. We spent a weekend in the mountains, just the two of us. No distractions, no timelines, just fresh air and soft laughter. That last night he made dinner at the cabin. Candles, music, everything warm and intimate. I didn't suspect a thing. Not until he reached into his pocket with that shaky breath and pulled out a velvet box. My heart stopped. "Lena," he said, voice thick, eyes bright. "I don't want to imagine life without you. Will you marry me?" For a second, the world fell completely silent. I should have said no, or at least hesitated longer. But in that moment, I didn't see Ethan. I didn't see Claire. I saw Julian, real, open, waiting. Then, like lightning, it all rushed back. The photo, the betrayal, the silence that followed. I looked him in the eye and said yes, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because this was the moment, the one I'd been building toward, and the timing couldn't be more perfect. Julian kissed me like he'd just won the lottery, like I was some rare gift he never expected to hold. And for a moment, I let myself melt into it, into the way his hands trembled slightly as he held my face, into the quiet gasp he made when I said yes. It was pure. It was honest. And it wasn't his fault that my heart was still carrying scars he didn't put there. But as he held me close that night, his breath warm against my skin, I couldn't help but feel it. That sharp edge inside me. The one that hadn't dulled. Not yet. A few days later, his parents invited us to a family dinner. A small celebration. Casual. Just the family. I knew what that meant. Ethan would be there. Claire, too, probably clinging to some desperate excuse for proximity. "She's still friends with the family," Julian had said once, not realizing how those words burned. But I smiled and said yes, because of course I did. It was almost poetic, really. The timing, the symmetry. The trap was setting itself. The night before the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the ring on my finger. It sparkled, a soft, romantic stone, probably chosen with care. It wasn't just a symbol of love. For me, it was armor, a statement, a reckoning. I practiced my smile, the one that would disarm and devastate. The one that would look Claire dead in the eye and ask nothing out loud, but say everything she needed to hear. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I chose my dress carefully. Soft cream silk, simple but striking. Not loud, not flashy. Just enough to say, "I belong here, and I'm not the woman you left behind." As Julian drove us to his parents' house, he held my hand the whole way, occasionally bringing it to his lips, his thumb grazing the ring like it was some sacred token. I smiled at him because he deserved that, the warmth, the sweetness. He was a good man, maybe too good for a night like this. We pulled up to the familiar house, the one I'd visited countless times back when I was still Ethan's girl. The air smelled the same: cut grass, barbecue smoke, jasmine somewhere nearby. But everything else had changed. I walked in on Julian's arm, and every head turned. His mother's eyes lit up. His father offered a surprised but approving nod. And then, like clockwork, Ethan appeared from the kitchen, wineglass in hand, and Claire, right behind him. She froze when she saw me. That was the first victory. Dinner was a blur of clinking glasses and fake laughter. Claire barely touched her food. Ethan kept sneaking glances like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I stayed close to Julian, leaned into his shoulder, laughed at his jokes. Every gesture was real, but also chosen. Carefully, deliberately. Because I wasn't here just to celebrate. I was here to deliver. And when Julian stood up to make a toast, I already knew exactly what was coming. Julian stood, clearing his throat gently, and everyone at the table turned toward him. His mother smiled instinctively. She adored her boys. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, probably expecting a story about their childhood or some harmless toast about family. Claire kept her eyes low, her fork scraping at untouched potatoes. And me? I kept my face soft, almost shy, as if I didn't know what was coming. But inside, my heart was pounding like a drum. Not from nerves, from satisfaction. I just want to say, Julian began, his voice steady, that I'm happier than I've ever been. He looked down at me, his fingers brushing mine. And I want you all to know, Lena and I are engaged. Gasps echoed like a ripple. His mom clapped her hands together. His dad raised his eyebrows. But I didn't look at them. I looked directly at Ethan, and the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. Claire's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate. I slowly lifted my hand, letting the ring catch the warm light like a weapon polished to perfection. "Surprise," I said with a small, sweet smile. "The kind you give when you've already won." Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it. Claire stood up abruptly, muttering something about the bathroom. I didn't stop her. I just watched her leave, her heels clicking too fast across the tile. Ethan started to rise too, but not before I gave him the finishing touch. I turned toward him, eyes steady, and said, "Funny how life works. I lost a boyfriend and a best friend, but gained something much better." The room was so quiet, you could hear the fireplace crackle behind us. Julian was still smiling, completely unaware of the slow-motion explosion he'd just triggered. His arm stayed around me, proud and protective, while Ethan stood frozen, holding that stupid wine glass like it was anchoring him to reality. His jaw was tight. His eyes flicked from my face to the ring and back again, trying to solve a puzzle that was already finished. Part of me wondered if he'd say something, if he'd try to stop this somehow. But he didn't. He couldn't. Claire hadn't returned. No surprise there. She was probably in the bathroom trying not to vomit. Or cry. Maybe both. I imagined her staring at herself in the mirror, wondering how the girl she used to pity had just walked into her world and turned it inside out. I pictured her hands shaking, her mascara smudged, her breath shallow. That's the thing about betrayal. It comes back for you eventually. Not in screams, not in chaos, in silence, in rings, in carefully planned dinner tables. Julian raised his glass, so sweetly, so innocently. "To love," he said, and everyone echoed it. I clinked glasses, my hand steady. Ethan didn't. He set his drink down and quietly excused himself from the table. No one stopped him. A beat later, Claire slipped out too. Two shadows slinking down a hallway, stunned and shattered. I took another sip of wine, breathing in the moment, letting it settle in my bones. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. Served at 7 p.m., medium rare, with Pinot Noir. After they left the room, the energy slowly returned. Polite laughter, small talk, compliments on the roast. But I stayed still, watching the hallway they'd disappeared into. I wondered if they were arguing, whispering, blaming each other. Ethan probably denying everything, Claire spiraling, both of them realizing, too late, that they'd been outplayed by the one they underestimated most. I didn't need to hear it to know. That kind of panic has a presence, even behind closed doors. Julian leaned into me, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "You okay?" My heart pulled a little at that. He was so genuine, so untouched by all the mess beneath the surface. I nodded, resting my head lightly on his shoulder. "Never better," I said. And in that moment, it wasn't even a lie. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. Not just surviving, not just pretending, actually steering the wheel. And the look on Ethan's face, worth every second. When dinner ended, we said our goodbyes, exchanged hugs, posed for a photo his mother insisted on taking. I smiled like a woman in love. I held Julian's hand like I meant it. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I did. But as we drove home, his fingers laced through mine. One thought echoed louder than the rest. This wasn't the end. Not yet. The whispers were just beginning. And tomorrow, the storm would spread. By the next morning, it had already begun. The calls. The whispers. The "did you hear?" and the "you're not going to believe this." I didn't even have to say a word. That dinner had done all the talking. Word spread like perfume on silk. Slow, subtle, impossible to ignore. And just like that, Claire wasn't invited to brunches anymore. Her comments on family group chats went unanswered. People didn't pick sides out loud, but you could feel it. Her name became a pause in the conversation. A stain no one wanted to touch. Ethan tried to reach me 2 days later. A text, just one line. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because silence was louder. He followed up with a voicemail. His voice cracked halfway through. He said he missed me. Said he didn't know why he did what he did. Said he was confused. I listened to the whole thing, standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea, letting his voice echo through the tiles and stainless steel. Then I deleted it. I didn't need closure. I needed distance. Julian, on the other hand, was glowing, planning engagement photos, asking about venues, telling his friends how lucky he felt. And here's the strange part. I wasn't faking my smile as much anymore. He had a way of making everything lighter, easier, like I could actually have a different ending than the one I'd been dragging behind me. But even as we talked about flowers and playlists, I kept the truth tucked quietly in the back of my mind. This may have started with revenge, but what came next? That was entirely up to me. Claire didn't reach out. Not once. Not even to defend herself. I half expected some dramatic message, an apology, a confession, maybe even denial. But nothing came. Just silence. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. She was caught. And now that her mask had slipped, she had no idea how to face me without the fake sweetness she used to hide behind. I imagined her pacing around her apartment, reliving every message she ever sent Ethan, wondering who else had seen the photo. That kind of fear sticks. Ethan, though? He kept trying. A few more texts. A long email I didn't finish reading. He even showed up once, outside my building. He didn't come in, just stood there, staring up at my window like a ghost from another life. I watched him from behind the curtain, heart steady, eyes dry. The man I once loved was now a stranger, and I didn't owe that stranger a damn thing. Let him stand in the cold. Let him wonder how everything slipped through his fingers. Julian knew none of this. He was busy making guest lists, calling caterers, asking me if I liked ivory or blush for table linens. Part of me felt guilty. But the other part? The part that had been betrayed, humiliated, replaced? That part felt powerful. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was choosing. Every day, choosing how far this would go. Choosing what kind of ending this story would have. Because the truth is, I wasn't just healing, I was evolving. And I wasn't finished yet. A few weeks later, I stood in front of my mirror again. The same one where I'd first stared at my broken reflection and whispered, "No more crying." Only this time, the woman looking back at me was different, stronger, sharper. She didn't need permission to take up space. She didn't need anyone to choose her. I slipped the engagement ring onto my finger, slowly, like sealing a promise. Not just to Julian, but to myself. A promise that I'd never be that woman again. The one who begged for honesty from people who gave her lies. There was no ceremony, no fireworks, just a small moment. Me, alone in my apartment, lit by soft morning light, watching the ring catch it like a quiet blaze. It was never about the jewelry. It was about the symbolism, the circle, the claim, the transformation. Julian loved me. Maybe I loved him too. Or maybe I was still learning how to love from a place that wasn't pain. I didn't know what came next. And honestly, that felt freeing.
And the thunderous applause as my sister walked down the aisle, draped in a custom-made designer lehenga worth more than my annual salary. My parents stood at the center of it all, beaming with pride like royalty. My father, who rarely ever showed emotion, actually cried that day. Not quiet tears, real ones. He held her hand tightly as he walked her to the stage, whispering something that made her laugh through her veil. And me? I was seated in the third row, behind distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. No one even noticed I was there. Everything about the wedding screamed excess. Imported orchids flown in just for the table centerpieces. A 6-tiered cake none of us even tasted. A fireworks display that lit up the sky like a national celebration. All paid for by my parents without a second thought. I watched as they hugged guests, posed for pictures, toasted glasses, and received compliments about their beautiful family. People kept saying, "You must be so proud," and I wanted to scream, "Of whom exactly?" When it was time for the couple's first dance, the spotlight dimmed and followed them onto the floor. I remember staring at my sister smile, flawless, rehearsed, adored. And then I glanced at my parents, who looked at her like she was the sun itself. I didn't exist in that glow. Nobody asked me to come up. Nobody pulled me in for photos. I wasn't the bridesmaid or the sister of the bride or the emotional daughter. I was just there. An extra, a witness to a celebration that told me, loud and clear, who mattered and who didn't. Later that night, when we got back home, I heard my mom on the phone telling someone, "We really went all out for this one. She deserves it. She's always been our little princess." And in that moment, I knew exactly where I stood in this family. On the sidelines applauding someone else's spotlight with no intention of ever being allowed my own. Growing up, I used to think love was something you earned. So I tried. I brought home perfect report cards, stayed out of trouble, helped around the house, and always made sure my shoes were lined up neatly at the door, because my sister never did. She was loud, messy, wild, but she sparkled. And for some reason, everyone loved to sparkle more than stability. At every family gathering, it was the same story. "Look how pretty she is. She's so lively. She'll marry rich. Just wait." Meanwhile, I was introduced as the other one. Quiet, mature, practical, words that sound like compliments but feel like apologies. I built my life from scratch, paid my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, skipped vacations to save money, and carved out a small but successful career. I didn't complain. I didn't expect handouts. I just thought, when my time came, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd say, "We're proud of you too." So when I got engaged, I let myself hope. Just a little. I brought it up gently one afternoon, sitting across from my parents at the kitchen table. "We're thinking of a small wedding," I said, smiling. "But I'd love your support." My mom barely looked up from her tea. "You're smart, honey," she said with a smirk. "Go earn it yourself." She laughed as if it were a compliment, as if self-sufficiency were a prize I'd begged to win. My father, sitting beside her, just nodded like a man who'd heard something reasonable. I blinked, stunned. There was no question, no hesitation. They hadn't even asked about the date or the venue. Just nothing. And that's when it really hit me. All those years I spent thinking love was earned. It wasn't. At least, not in this house. In this house, love was gifted to the one who glittered and rationed for the one who built her own shine. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized I could spend a lifetime chasing their approval and still be the second daughter, the one who always came after, always gave more, and always got less. But not anymore. I started cutting corners the day after that conversation with my parents. Every dollar became precious. No more takeout coffee. No more Uber rides. No more spontaneous dinners with friends. I made spreadsheets, clipped coupons, and picked up extra shifts like my life depended on it, because in a way it did. Planning a wedding isn't just expensive. It's emotional. Every decision feels heavier when you're carrying it alone. My fiancé, Daniel, offered to take care of more than half the costs. But I didn't want to start our life with a one-sided burden. I wanted us to walk into marriage as equals, not with me dragging shame behind me like a train on a gown I couldn't afford. Meanwhile, my sister, Maya, was living her version of a fairy tale. After the wedding, which looked like something off a Pinterest board, she and her husband moved into a fully furnished condo, gifted by my parents as a starting point. Every month, they sent her money for groceries. When she got bored with her job, she quit. My mom called it finding herself. My dad said she's still adjusting. Daniel noticed, of course. He didn't say anything for a while. But one night, after watching Maya unwrap yet another expensive just because gift from our parents, he turned to me and asked, "Are you okay with all this?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend I was used to it, but something cracked open inside me. "No," I said, "but I'm not surprised anymore." Sometimes the hardest part wasn't the sacrifice, it was the silence. The way no one checked in. No call from my mom asking if I needed help. No offer from my dad to walk me through budgets or decisions. They didn't even ask how things were going. It was like my wedding didn't exist. Like I didn't exist. Like I'd chosen to be invisible by not being their favorite. I worked weekends. I sold some jewelry. I gave up my savings for a honeymoon so we could afford a decent venue. Daniel offered again to help cover everything, but I shook my head. "Let me do this," I said. "I need to." There were moments I cried in the bathroom between shifts, wondering if any of this was worth it. But then I'd wipe my tears, take a deep breath, and remember, I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them anymore. I was doing it to honor myself, to build a celebration that reflected my strength, not their absence. Some days, the weight of that reality felt like too much, but I carried it anyway, quietly, proudly, because even though I was walking the hardest road alone, I knew where it was leading, and it wasn't back to them. Every bride dreams of planning her wedding surrounded by loved ones, laughter echoing through fitting rooms, advice exchanged over coffee, warm hands helping fold invitation cards late at night. I had none of that. Instead, I had checklists taped to my fridge, invoices tucked into a worn-out binder, and a tight chest every time I checked my bank balance. My weekends were spent scouting venues alone. When I tried on dresses, I had to ask a store assistant to zip me up. She smiled kindly, probably wondering why the bride had no entourage. I told her I liked it quiet, but the lie tasted bitter in my mouth. I sent out formal invitations, beautiful cream cards with gold lettering. I took my time writing out the ones for my parents and Maya. I didn't want them to think I forgot. I wanted them to know I remembered everything, even though they hadn't lifted a finger. When the RSVP date passed, my inbox had silence from their side. No enthusiastic text from my mom saying, "Can't wait." No emoji-filled reply from Maya. Just nothing. I called once, just to confirm they'd received them. My mom picked up, let out a light chuckle, and said, "Oh yes, we got them. We'll see what our schedule looks like." No warmth. No congratulations. Just polite dismissal. Like my wedding was some casual event that might make their calendar if they had a free afternoon. I hung up without pushing. That was the last time I reached out about it. The old me, the girl who used to beg for their attention, might have called again. Might have asked if they wanted to help pick the flowers or come to the final dress fitting. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was tired of proving my worth to people who had already made up their minds. Daniel noticed. "They don't deserve a seat," he said one night as we worked on the seating chart. I smiled at him. "They'll get one, but I won't leave any space in my heart waiting for them to fill it." Every other chair on that list had a name that mattered. Friends who'd helped me clean up after late shifts, coworkers who cheered me on, Daniel's family who offered more kindness in a few months than mine had in years. My wedding was no longer about showing them I was enough. It was about surrounding myself with people who already believed I was. And whether my family came or not didn't matter anymore, because I had finally stopped waiting for their applause. The sun rose gently on my wedding day, casting golden light over the soft ivory curtains and delicate pink flowers lacing the venue. Everything was in place. The string quartet tuning their instruments, the scent of jasmine from centerpieces. I chose myself. The quiet hum of guests arriving dressed in their finest. But something else hung in the air too. Anticipation, not just for the vows or the cake, but for a truth that was about to unfold. I stood in the bridal suite, veil pinned, lipstick fresh, heart steady. I looked at my reflection, not the tired girl who once cried over being forgotten, but a woman who built every inch of this day from the ground up. There was no resentment in my heart now, just a readiness to let the moment speak for itself. When my parents arrived, they were late, of course. My mother wore a crisp silk sari, and my father walked with his usual stiff pride. Maya wasn't with them. They glanced around with puzzled expressions. "Where's the other car?" I heard my mother ask the event coordinator. "We're waiting for Maya and her husband." The coordinator blinked. "Ma'am, there's only one bride today." Silence. Confusion flickered on their faces. My father's brow furrowed. My mother's lips parted slightly as if to protest, but then she saw it, the sign at the entrance. "Welcome to the wedding of Daniel and Layla." No mention of Maya. No shared spotlight. Just me. They stepped into the hall, slow and disoriented, scanning the elegant setup they never helped create. The seats filled with people they didn't know, my people. The friends who carried me emotionally. The colleagues who supported me. Daniel's parents who smiled at them politely with warmth they didn't return. Then their eyes landed on the front row. 2 seats marked, reserved for bride's parents. Still empty. I watched them from a distance. They hesitated. Maybe they expected me to run over, to greet them, to plead for them to stay. But I didn't move. I just smiled softly, turned toward the aisle, and nodded to the music coordinator. As the wedding march began, and I stepped out arm in arm with Daniel, every eye turned to me. And that's when the realization fully struck them. This wasn't Maya's day. It wasn't theirs to oversee or take credit for. It was mine. For the first time in my life, they weren't the center of the room. I was. And their seats stayed empty. It wasn't just their silence that filled those empty seats. It was the weight of a truth they hadn't yet discovered. A truth I had carried quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to let it breathe. Maya wasn't just absent because it was my day. She was absent because she couldn't show her face. Her picture-perfect marriage? Cracked. Shattered. Gone. They didn't know. My parents, who had paraded her wedding like a royal coronation, had no clue that less than a year in, Maya and her husband had separated. No dramatic breakup, no explosive fight. Just distance, disappointment, and silence that turned into finality. I had found out months ago, through a mutual friend who couldn't hide the shock when she bumped into Maya alone, moving into a small apartment across town. But I never told them. Let them believe their golden daughter was still shining. Let them hang their hopes on an image she could no longer maintain. They had built her pedestal so high, they never noticed it was hollow underneath. Maya had begged me not to tell them. "They'll be devastated," she had whispered during one of the rare calls we had. Her voice was strained, small. "I just need time. Please don't say anything yet." And I hadn't. Not out of kindness. Not out of loyalty. But because some truths are more powerful when they reveal themselves naturally. Like wine spilled on a white dress. It stains deeper when it's unexpected. So as I stood under the soft lights of my own reception, smiling in a sea of real love and earned celebration, I knew Maya was miles away, curled up somewhere, hiding from the eyes that once adored her. And my parents, still blissfully unaware, sipping juice, offering tight smiles to strangers, waiting for the moment Maya would make her grand entrance. It never came. I saw my mother checking her phone again and again. My father whispered to her, confusion growing. They had expected Maya to walk in with her husband, to share the spotlight, to once again upstage me without even trying. But the evening passed. Speech after speech, dance after dance, toasts filled with laughter and tears from people who knew my journey. And not a single word about Maya. My mother finally leaned toward me during dinner, forcing a smile. Sweetheart, is Maya all right? She didn't text or call. We thought she'd at least show up with, well, her husband. I sipped my drink slowly, then looked her in the eye. I'm not sure, I said, voice even. We haven't spoken much lately. I saw it, just a flicker of fear. That tightening in her chest. That uneasy feeling a parent gets when their golden child goes quiet for too long. But I said no more, because this night wasn't about Maya. It wasn't about secrets or shame or saving anyone's pride. It was about me, finally seen, finally celebrated, finally standing in the light I created for myself. And as I raised my glass to Daniel, to love, to all the people who lifted me when my own family looked away, I silently toasted Maya too. Not out of pity, but because sometimes the loudest revenge is a quiet success. And sometimes the loudest failure is silence. They sat there, stiff-backed and smiling through tight lips, surrounded by unfamiliar faces who toasted to a daughter they barely knew. Every detail of the evening was stunning, elegant yet deeply personal. Handwritten thank you notes at every table, a playlist of songs that carried meaning, speeches that spoke of hard work, resilience, and a woman who had lifted herself by the roots while others stood by and watched. I watched my parents closely. My mother's eyes kept scanning the room, looking for a face she now knew wouldn't appear. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the linen napkin in her lap, lips pursed so tightly they turned white. My father, normally composed, looked smaller somehow, as if the tuxedo that once made him feel important now didn't quite fit. And still I said nothing. I had given them no special role in the ceremony, no walk down the aisle, no front row seat, just standard guest seating, next to an accountant I once worked with and his cheerful wife. And yet that placement said everything I needed to say. I was no longer the daughter waiting to be seen. I was the woman who had stopped asking. It was during the maid of honor's speech that something shifted. Anna, my best friend since college, stood up with a glass of champagne and a voice full of emotion. She spoke not just about love, but about the years she watched me work, scrape, and sacrifice, about the late nights, the missed vacations, the way I quietly saved for my dream wedding while carrying everyone else's silence on my back. I've seen her build something beautiful, Anna said, her voice steady, not just in this room tonight, but in her life. And she did it without anyone handing her anything. She did it alone. And now she's never alone again. The applause was thunderous. And I saw it, my father's hand, slowly curling into a fist in his lap. My mother's jaw tightening. Their eyes no longer darted around in search of Maya. Instead, they were fixed on me, really looking at me, maybe for the first time. They weren't proud. Not yet. First came confusion, then realization, and finally guilt. But I didn't offer them warm smiles or waiting arms. I gave them what they had given me for years, polite distance, a nod when our eyes met, a soft thank you for coming when they approached. Nothing more, because this wasn't their victory. It wasn't even their redemption. It was my boundary. Later, as guests laughed and danced around them, I caught sight of my mother whispering something to my father. His expression turned solemn, then ashamed. It was the look of someone who had just stumbled into a mirror and didn't like the reflection. They had raised 2 daughters, but only invested in one. The one who smiled on magazine covers, who wore designer shoes and gave them Instagram-worthy moments. But tonight, it was the other daughter, the quiet one, the smart one, the one they told to earn her way, who had created something unforgettable. Not just a wedding, but a world. A life filled with people who showed up for her, not out of obligation, but out of love. And as they watched me move through that world with calm confidence, they realized something that would haunt them for a long time. They had given everything to the wrong child, and I had turned their rejection into a foundation they could never claim credit for. The music swelled as the lights dimmed to a warm, golden hue. Laughter floated in the air, blending with clinking glasses and the rhythm of celebration. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching the world I had built, piece by piece, choice by choice, move and glow around me. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a beginning. And more than that, it was proof. I didn't need their approval anymore. I never truly did. What I needed was what I found along the way, myself. My husband reached for my hand. His smile was steady, warm, and full of pride. Not because of how I looked tonight or the elegance of the hall, but because he knew what it had taken to get here. He had seen the nights I sat in silence calculating budgets, the mornings I swallowed tears to face work with a smile, and the moments when I fought back doubt alone because there was no one else to hold the line with me. And now I wasn't alone anymore. He led me onto the floor as the band began to play our song, soft, timeless, and full of soul. Guests gathered around, forming a circle of warmth and admiration. My best friend stood clapping, my coworkers smiling through tears, and even my old neighbor who used to bring me hot soup when I was too busy to cook. These people didn't share my blood, but they showed up for me in ways my family never had. As we danced, I caught a glimpse of my parents in the corner. They weren't clapping. They weren't smiling. They were watching a daughter they had underestimated take the spotlight, not because someone handed it to her, but because she built the stage herself. I didn't need them to feel shame or regret. That part no longer belonged to me. I had spent too many years carrying their choices like a second skin. Tonight, I finally shed it. The applause grew as we twirled and laughed, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. Everything felt lighter. The tension, the hurt, the silent questions, they all drifted away. I had arrived, not at the end of a journey, but at the start of a new one. One where I didn't beg for love. One where I didn't shrink myself for comfort or chase validation in tight smiles and shallow praise. I was enough. I am enough. And no seat they chose to take or not take could rewrite that truth. After the final note, I hugged my friends. I thanked the caterers. I took photos, toasted, and felt the fullness of joy I had carved with my own hands. Later that night, as the crowd began to thin and the stars blinked outside the tall glass windows, I stepped out for a breath of fresh air. My dress flowed behind me, and my heels clicked softly on the stone path outside the hall. My husband joined me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled and leaned into him. "No," I said softly, "we did it." And then, as if speaking not just to him, but to every version of myself that ever felt small or unseen, I whispered into the night. I wasn't born their favorite, but I became my own. Because at the end of the day, the truest love, the kind that anchors you through storms and lifts you when no one claps, is the love you give yourself when no one else does. And that was the real celebration. The last dance wasn't just a moment on a floor. It was a declaration of survival, of strength, of self-worth. And the woman who once stood in the shadow of her sister's spotlight, she became the light. Maybe if I talked less, smiled more, tried harder, he'd love me. But no matter what I did, my dad never looked at me the way he looked at my brothers. Never with pride, never with warmth, just indifference. My name is Alina, and growing up, I was the invisible one in my own family. My father, Richard, wasn't the yelling type. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. When I got straight A's in middle school, he barely nodded. But when my brother Jake passed a single class he'd been failing, Dad clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy." I was 12 when I first realized it. It was Father's Day. I'd spent hours making a card, decorating it with glitter, stickers, and a poem I wrote myself. I handed it to him after dinner, my little heart bursting with hope. He glanced at it, muttered thanks, and went right back to watching the game on TV. 5 minutes later, my brother Ryan came in, tossed him a store-bought mug that said #OneDad, and Dad acted like he'd just been handed a trophy at the Super Bowl. I remember standing there, card still clutched in my hand, wondering why mine wasn't enough. That's what it always came down to. I was never enough. Ryan and Jake were the golden boys. Ryan was the athlete, always breaking school records and getting write-ups in the local paper. Jake was the smooth talker, charming teachers, relatives, and anyone who crossed his path. And me? I was the quiet one, the moody one, the girl who spent too much time in her room writing stories or drawing. My mother used to try to balance things out. She'd hug me tight and whisper, "You're special too, sweetheart." But even she knew the hierarchy in our house. If Ryan wanted the last slice of pizza, he got it. If Jake needed money, Dad handed it over, no questions asked. I once asked for a new sketchbook, and Dad said, "What's the point? You'll quit halfway like everything else." That cut deeper than he'll ever know. At dinner, I'd sit quietly while Dad asked my brothers about their plans, their goals, their day. He never asked me. Not once. If I spoke up, it was usually met with a dismissive grunt or a forced smile. I learned to stay quiet, to not interrupt the boys' spotlight. But inside me, something was growing. Not just sadness, something sharper. Anger. A determination I couldn't yet name. I started working harder, pushing myself to excel, not because I thought he'd notice, but because I wanted to matter to someone, even if it was just myself. I stopped trying to win his love. Instead, I focused on building a life he couldn't ignore. A version of me he'd have no choice but to see. I was tired of being the forgotten daughter. One day, I promised myself he'd remember me, not as the quiet girl he dismissed, but as the woman who changed everything. If you ever walked into our house during the holidays, you'd think you were watching a commercial for the perfect American family. Laughter echoing from the kitchen. My brothers throwing a football in the backyard. Dad grinning with a beer in hand. But I knew the truth. I knew what it felt like to be the background in someone else's highlight reel. My brothers, Jake and Ryan, were born to shine. At least that's how my father made it seem. Jake, the eldest, could charm the stripes off a tiger. He was the guy who never studied, but somehow still passed with a wink and a smirk. Dad adored him. They had inside jokes, matching fishing hats, and a handshake they'd made up when Jake was 10. I remember watching them once from the hallway as Jake showed Dad a business idea scribbled on a napkin. Dad looked at him like he'd just solved world hunger. "Attaboy," he said, clapping him on the back. "You've got the brain of a leader." Ryan, the youngest, was the golden athlete. Soccer trophies lined his shelves. Dad went to every game, rain or shine, and screamed from the sidelines like a proud high school coach. After Ryan scored a winning goal, Dad threw a full backyard party. Barbecue, music, neighbors invited. I was there too, of course. Setting out plates. Cleaning up. Me. I got a good job once when I was accepted into the honors program. Just once. No party. No dinner. Just a passing sentence during breakfast in between bites of toast. Honors, huh? That's nice. I studied late into the night, pushed myself in every class, took part-time jobs to afford extra courses. I earned certificates, won quiet awards, even got a scholarship. But my success never sparkled the way theirs did in his eyes. At family dinners, Dad would beam with pride as he talked about Jake's new startup or Ryan's training camp. I'd mention my internship at a prestigious firm, and he'd nod, then turn back to my brothers. "Anyway," he'd say, "Jake, tell them about that investor meeting." The message was loud and clear. They were the main event. I was the intermission. But the most painful part? I didn't hate my brothers. They were never cruel to me. They loved the spotlight, sure, but they didn't shove me into the dark. It was my father who did that, and I couldn't understand why. I tried everything, being helpful, being independent, being successful. Nothing worked. Sometimes I wondered if he even realized the way his favoritism crushed me. Other times I knew he did and just didn't care. I told myself to let it go, to focus on myself, to not need his validation. But deep down I still wished for it. Just once I wanted him to say, "I'm proud of you, Alina." Not because he had to, but because he meant it. That moment never came. But another one did, one that would change everything. Not in the way he expected, and certainly not in the way he wanted. It was supposed to be my moment. The culmination of years spent burning the midnight oil, sacrificing social nights, and drowning in self-doubt. I had built my small startup, an innovative digital platform that was set to revolutionize the local market. It wasn't just a business. It was the embodiment of every late night, every tear, and every quiet moment of determination. I had poured my soul into it, believing that finally my worth would be undeniable. The launch event was held in a sleek, modern conference room downtown. Investors, local press, and industry leaders poured in, their eyes full of curiosity and anticipation. I took the stage with a trembling mix of excitement and fear, my heart pounding as if trying to escape the confines of my chest. I began to speak about my vision, the countless hurdles overcome, and the promise of a brighter future that my platform represented. The room was silent, hanging on to every word I uttered. For the first time, I felt seen, really seen, for what I'd achieved on my own merit. After the presentation, the energy in the room shifted. Handshakes and congratulations flowed in, and I even caught snippets of praise from seasoned investors who saw potential in my work. With a cautious smile, I made my way to a quieter corner, allowing myself a brief moment of relief and pride. Yet, as the evening progressed, that pride would soon be shattered. Later that week, the family gathered at home for a celebratory dinner, a habitual reunion that was as much about showcasing accomplishments as it was about displaying hierarchy. In the softly lit dining room, my brothers arrived with their usual effortless confidence, each exchanging stories of victories and milestones. The air was thick with unspoken triumphs that had long been crystallized into our family's tradition of favoritism. When the dinner began, my father, Richard, took his customary seat at the head of the table. Conversation flowed, but inevitably the topic turned to achievements. I expected a moment of quiet acknowledgement, a nod, a word of respect, but instead the narrative swiftly pivoted. My father, with his practiced ease, began recounting the family's latest feats. "Ryan hit his third home run this season," he said, his voice brimming with pride, pausing for laughter from the gathered kin. "And Jake, I hear you've sealed another major deal for your new venture. Fantastic work, son." His words rolled out like well-rehearsed lines at a family play, each one earning its due applause. I cleared my throat, attempting to insert my voice into the conversation. I've just launched my own venture," I began, hopeful. But before I could elaborate, my father interjected with a dismissive gesture. Yes, we know you're busy, dear," he said lightly, almost as if he were referring to an insignificant chore. The room fell into a brief, awkward lull. A few nods were exchanged, but no one picked up on my intended pitch of triumph. That brief dismissal, that cold interruption, sent a shock through me. I remembered the countless times I had announced my small victories, only to have them reduced to mere background noise, overshadowed by the loud accolades of my brothers. In that moment, the weight of every ignored effort, every snub compliment, and every unspoken disregard crashed down like a tidal wave. The seeds of change had been sown. Sitting there, amidst the clamor of celebration for my brothers, I felt a fierce, burning clarity. I realized that no matter how far I climbed or how many milestones I reached, I would never be acknowledged by the person whose approval I had craved for so long. It was in that heart-shattering instant that I understood I could no longer play the quiet part in this tragic family drama. I would build a life so brilliant, so undeniable, that he could no longer dismiss me. And if he continued to steal my moments, then perhaps he'd finally face the consequences of his endless favoritism. After that dinner, something inside me shut down, not out of anger, but clarity. I stopped trying, not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of no longer seeking approval that would never come. I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't ask to be heard anymore. I simply went quiet. I started spending less time at family gatherings and more time in silence, just me and my goals. I moved out of the city, rented a modest but quiet apartment on the edge of town, and dove into my work like it was oxygen. The startup that I had launched, barely noticed by my own family, was now my world. It didn't pay much at first. I had weeks where dinner was just toast and instant coffee. I had to take freelance projects on the side to stay afloat. There were nights I cried quietly under my desk, questioning if I was even built for this. But for every doubt, there was a flicker of determination. I had no one clapping for me, no one cheering me on, but I was finally building for myself. I learned to fix bugs, write pitches, handle rejections, and chase clients with the kind of hunger only someone used to being overlooked could ever understand. Some nights I would scroll through social media and see photos of Jake at business conferences with Dad by his side, or Ryan holding yet another trophy with a caption about making the family proud. I'd feel that familiar sting, like a wound reopening, but I didn't let it stop me. Instead, I'd take a deep breath, close the app, and get back to work. My success wouldn't come from applause. It would come from perseverance. I grew in silence. No fancy updates, no family newsletters. Just long nights, stubborn effort, and the occasional client saying, "You're the only one who actually listened to what we needed." Those words felt better than anything my father could have said because they were real. After a year, the company started gaining traction. Our user base grew. A niche investor found potential in what we were doing and poured in seed money. I finally hired a small team, people who, like me, knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Together, we built something incredible. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't send out the usual holiday emails. I didn't show up at family events with success stories to toss around like confetti. I let them assume I was the same girl in the background, living small. That's how I wanted it. But within me, everything was changing. My posture shifted. My voice got firmer. I wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had found something better. I had found me. For the first time in my life, I made decisions without second-guessing. I bought my first car on my own. I signed the lease to a sleek office space with floor-to-ceiling windows, and I did it without needing someone to tell me, "Good job." I became the woman I had once only dreamed of becoming, the one my younger self thought she had to become for them. But now I was doing it for me. And in all that silence, I was building something far more powerful than a career. I was building freedom. I still remember the first time I walked past a mirror and didn't flinch. My reflection didn't look like the forgotten daughter anymore. She looked like someone who had clawed her way out of invisibility and created a life of her own design. And it wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet strength, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen but can't be ignored. And soon, they wouldn't be able to ignore me either. Not after what I was about to do. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. Not even for the obligatory phone calls. The silence was mutual. No one reached out to check on me, and I didn't expect them to. That's the thing about being forgotten. You eventually become comfortable with your own absence. But this year I made a decision. I RSVP'd to the annual Father's Day dinner. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a simple, "I'll be there" in the family group chat. The reactions were a mix of emojis and passive silence. I could almost feel the awkwardness through the screen. The night before, I stood in front of a sleek black luxury car in a dealership showroom, signing paperwork under a fake last name I had legally changed to after launching my business. They wouldn't even recognize it. None of them had ever asked what I was doing or who I was becoming. Next to me sat a small black envelope. The edges were crisp, the paper heavy and expensive. Inside was a single legal document that would change everything. Father's Day arrived. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to remind myself who I had become. Confidence in every inch of fabric. Power in every step. When I pulled into the driveway, the car's engine purred like a warning. My siblings were already there, clinking glasses and laughing on the patio. Dad was at the head of the table, grinning wide, drink in hand. The favorite role he played so well. His eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment, confusion broke through his usual smugness. Then a smile. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Everyone turned. I could feel their surprise and judgment settle into the air. I smiled politely. "Hi, everyone. Happy Father's Day, Dad." The dinner was the same mix of forced laughs and subtle jabs. Jake talked about his new condo. Ryan bragged about another promotion. Dad nodded and beamed, like a king surrounded by princes. And then came the moment. I stood up slowly, the quiet drawing everyone's attention. I brought something for you," I said, looking directly at Dad. I walked outside, leaving the door open behind me. Moments later, I drove the luxury car into the driveway. Sleek, black, impossible to ignore. I got out, walked back inside, and laid the small black envelope on the table in front of him. For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day. Gasps rippled through the room. Is that a car? Jake asked, squinting toward the driveway. Ryan leaned forward. Wait, you bought that? Dad looked from the keys to me, completely stunned. He picked up the envelope, his fingers trembling a little. What's this? Just open it, I said quietly, my voice calm and steady. Everyone leaned in as he slipped the paper out. For a second, his expression didn't change. Then his eyes started darting over the page, and slowly his face drained of color. His jaw clenched. What is this? He barked, now glaring at me. I gave him a long, unreadable smile. Read it carefully. You'll see. And with that, I turned, walked out the door, and got into the car. I drove away as the shouting started behind me. Because that envelope? It wasn't just paper. It was the ownership document of the company that had just acquired the firm he worked for. His job, his pride, his status, all now under my control. Happy Father's Day indeed. The house looked the same, tastefully decorated, spotless, cold. My mother moved in and out of the dining room like a silent shadow, refilling glasses and smiling at jokes that weren't funny. My brothers were already a few drinks in, and the air felt thick with old habits and unspoken rules. I sat quietly at the end of the table, the black envelope resting in my purse, heavy like heartbeat. The car keys were tucked safely into my coat pocket, parked just outside the window in full view of the driveway. The conversation swirled around me like I wasn't even there. Ryan talked about his latest investment win. Jake cracked jokes about people who still rent. And Dad, of course, nodded in approval, soaking in the pride like sunlight. So, how's business, Dad? Jake asked, lifting his glass. Dad chuckled. Busy as always. But, not everyone is cut out for this kind of pressure. Takes real backbone. He looked at Ryan. Good thing I've got 2 sons who aren't afraid to lead. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It wasn't even subtle anymore. Then he glanced down the table toward me. I could feel the moment shift before he even opened his mouth. And then there's the loser sitting at the table, he said, gesturing toward me with a smirk. Still pretending to be the black sheep, huh? The laughter exploded. Jake nearly choked on his drink. Ryan laughed so hard he had to slap the table. My hand stayed folded in my lap. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just waited. When the laughter finally died down, I stood up. Slowly, calmly. The way you move when you already know how the story ends. I actually brought you something, Dad, I said, pulling the envelope from my purse. A little Father's Day gift. The room stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. I walked down the length of the table and placed the envelope directly in front of him. He glanced at it, puzzled. What is this? Just open it, I said, then stepped back and folded my arms. He ripped the flap with dramatic flair, as if expecting a joke or cash. His fingers unfolded the paper, and as his eyes began to scan the words, the color in his face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, creeping horror. What the hell is this? He asked, looking up at me, eyes narrowing. You remember Anderson Tech? The company you've worked at for the last 10 years. I said softly, it's under new ownership. A beat. I bought it, I continued, through a silent acquisition, effective last week. The silence was immediate, deafening. I leaned in slightly and added, so no, I'm not the loser at the table. I'm the woman who just became your boss's boss. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Jake looked pale. Ryan dropped his fork. And that car out front, I said, glancing toward the window. That was part of the presentation, but I'll be taking it with me now. I turned without waiting for permission, walked outside, and slid into the driver's seat. The sound of the engine roared to life, and just as I pulled away, I heard it, his scream from the open front door. It wasn't anger. It was fear. The car's engine hummed steadily as I drove away from the house. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, the weight of what I had just done settling into my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something much deeper. For years, I had let myself shrink in the shadows of a family that never truly saw me, and now I was standing tall, casting a shadow they couldn't ignore. But the weight of the moment wasn't the only thing pulling at me. I knew what was happening behind me. I could picture it as clearly as if I were still sitting at that table, hearing the deafening silence that followed my words. I wasn't there anymore, but my actions would speak louder than anything I could have said. Back inside, my father's hands were shaking as he held the paper. He looked from it to his son's, his lips moving as though he were trying to find words that wouldn't come. I could see the panic beginning to bloom, creeping through every muscle in his body, spreading like a virus. "Dad," Jake asked, his voice suddenly small. He stood up, coming around to where Dad sat frozen, the paper still gripped tightly in his hands. "What's going on?" Ryan, the ever-confident one, had already stood up as well, trying to peek over their father's shoulder. "What is that? It looks like Wait, is that real?" Dad didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the document, his fingers skimming the words but failing to make sense of them. The words on the page were simple enough, but for him, they were a death sentence. I could already hear their questions in my mind. The panic, the disbelief, the frantic rush to understand what was happening. They'd always relied on him for answers. Now the answers were slipping away, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Finally, Jake couldn't take the silence anymore. "Dad, what does it say? What's going on?" Dad looked up, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't catch his breath. It's a transfer of property," he muttered, his voice weak. "A reversal of assets. All of it. The company. The house. My shares." The panic in his voice was palpable. His sons froze. Ryan blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're telling me this? This document means she owns everything?" The realization hit them like a slap. The silence deepened, but this time it wasn't awkward, it was suffocating. My father had always been the pillar, the one everyone turned to for stability. But now he was the one on his knees, his empire crumbling before his eyes. His sons had no idea how to process it. Jake staggered back from the table, his face going red. How could she do this?" he hissed, his voice rising in anger. She's nothing. We're the ones who worked for this. How could she?" Dad held up a shaking hand, his mind still trying to catch up with the magnitude of what had just happened. She's not nothing, he said, his voice cracking. "She's everything." Ryan's eyebrows furrowed, his earlier cockiness replaced with uncertainty. "What do you mean, Dad? What's going on? How could she?" "She owns it all," Dad said, his voice barely a whisper. "She owns the company. She owns the house. Everything. Everything I've worked for, it's hers now." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The sons who had once worshipped their father, who had seen him as the king of their world, were now faced with a reality they could hardly comprehend. They hadn't even considered her as a contender. To them, I was the shadow, the forgotten one, the one who wasn't enough. But now, I was the one who held the power. "I don't understand," Jake said, his voice shaking now. "How could she? When did this happen? Why didn't we know?" Dad finally looked up, his face etched with defeat. "She didn't want you to know. She didn't need to tell you. She doesn't need us." Ryan took a step back, trying to collect himself. "But how did she get this much? How?" "She didn't ask for anything," Dad said, his voice cold now. "She just took it." The room was frozen in disbelief, the weight of the betrayal, of my quiet, calculated rise, settling over them all. For the first time in their lives, my brothers were forced to confront the reality they had been so blind to for years. I was not the failure they thought I was. I was the one who had worked silently, without the applause, without the validation. And now, everything they depended on was mine. My father let out a long, ragged sigh. "She's smarter than I gave her credit for," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "And I'll never be able to take that back." The fear, the panic, it was all there, written on their faces. But for me, it was the start of something new. The start of me taking my place in the world. Not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had finally earned her right to be seen. I didn't look back as I walked away from that house. The weight that had been holding me down for so long, the constant need to prove myself, the hunger for approval that would never come, finally lifted. I had made it. Not because they'd recognized me, but because I had recognized myself. The phone buzzed with messages. The family was scrambling, trying to figure out what I had done, why I had left so suddenly, and what that paper meant. I knew they would be in shock, especially my father, but I didn't care. I had already taken what I needed from them. The power to stand on my own, to walk away from everything I had once thought I needed. I wasn't the girl they always ignored. I wasn't the daughter they thought they could control or dismiss. I was my own person now, free from the chains of their expectations. As the evening went on, I knew they were probably still sitting there, staring at that paper, trying to comprehend the magnitude of it. My father, who had always dismissed my efforts, would now understand what I was capable of, but it would be too late. All those years of neglect, of treating me as second best, had finally caught up with him. The house would never be the same. The balance of power had shifted, and I was no longer the one they could manipulate or overlook. The siblings who had always competed for his affection, who had never seen me as a true equal, would finally understand that I wasn't just a side player in their world. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love or their recognition. I had created a life for myself that didn't depend on them. I was successful, independent, and finally at peace. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone who had fought for her place in the world, someone who didn't need to look back to know she had won. The door was closed. I had walked out, but I had also walked into my own future, one that was all mine.